3-hour warning. So everybody knew about it. And we still had 40 people killed.
Oh, man, Tim. I don't know which you've had any relation with Gary or met him at any point. But both of us big weather geeks as well. I'm sure you know of Gary, but what are your thoughts about the passing of Gary England and what he meant to what we do now in our industry?
Yeah, never had the pleasure to meet him, Brad, but definitely enjoyed the pleasure of watching his work throughout the years. And I'm learning. I find this a lot of times when we have these legends pass that we hear about all of these impacts that they made, and just hearing about him being the first to use the Doppler radar the way that we do it for tornadoes now, and being the first to kind of show these warning alerts on TV that you might see on your screen nowadays. Like, all of these are ideas that someone had to have at some point. And someone had to kind of fight for and say, this is what we should be doing. So the fact that that was laid out so long ago, even, I mean, those decades and decades ago, that's so impressive and such a legacy to leave for us to follow. And I love that message in the clip you just played right there. These are people's lives that we're talking about when we talk about bad storms, especially tornadoes. And it's so important not to be hysterical and not to be screaming or anything like that, but just to be calm and letting people know what's going on and, kind of earning their trust that way. And I think that's what a lot of people will remember with Gary, along with many of the other meteorology legends in the business.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever watched Oklahoma City television during a tornado warning, but it is it is something to behold. It is like to see where he started. I remember watching him the first time and him talking to chasers. They had chasers all over the place. They would call him on these two-way radios, and they had helicopters in the air. It was just it was something to behold. And to think about in the 70s, you mentioned this, in the 70s, he was using radar on TV. I wonder what the TV consultants were telling him back then. Probably telling him, what are you showing? But when I talk to people that lived in that area and know him, they honestly will tell you he saved people's lives. He did. And I think that is probably the most the most telling thing you can tell about somebody's status is that they appreciate that they saved your life. So we're running out of time here, Tim. I know this would go quick. Again, for everyone just joining us now, Tim Buckley from WFMY. He's going to be on our show quite a bit. We'll be tag teaming a lot of stuff together. Before we leave, Tim, anything you want to tell the viewers before we head out? We got about 10 seconds.
Yeah, just happy to be here, happy to be a part of it. If y'all have any weather questions, anytime, feel free to hit up Brad or me up in Greensboro as well. But we have plenty of time to answer those as we go forward.
All right, thanks, Tim. Don't go anywhere. In 2 minutes, you'll see Vanessa, and we'll have more Impact News coming up.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here for Live Impact News. I'm Vanessa Rufus. Hopefully you enjoyed the chat with Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich and also Tim Buckley out from our partners over at WFMY. So they are always going to be giving us the very latest with weather here during that 6:30 time slot every single weekday. Of course, now as we turn to Live Impact News, we're talking about some of the big news of the day and all of the live breaking feeds that continue to come in. Just to kind of set the table for what we might expect over the next couple of hours. We have a few stories that we're following and some feeds that we're already seeing coming in here to the Live Impact News studio. Of course, the protests that we continue to watch out of the LA area. We also mentioned there are basically ties in every single city to these protests, including here in Charlotte, here in the Carolinas, and we know there are going to be some protests coming up this weekend coinciding with President Trump's military parade in honor of the U.S. military celebrating its 250th anniversary. We're going to be talking about that. Of course, we'll be dipping in and out of those feeds. Our Tradisha Woodard, a bit closer to home, is going to be working on a really important update for us on a big story that really galvanized the Wadesboro community and beyond over recent weeks. You might remember back in April, there was news that broke about a police canine with Wadesboro police who died in the line of duty. We were told at the time by the police department that canine Blitz had died during an apprehension of a suspect. There was kind of a bit of convolution over how that transpired. Tradisha has been digging in week by week, getting more information, and just tonight we learned of some brand new legal action in the case. So Tradisha is going to be putting that story together and coming to join us here on Live Impact News. We've also, of course, got big news from the music world, sad news. Brian Wilson, of course, a pioneer in pop, leader of the Beach Boys, one of the co-founders of the Beach Boys, has passed away at the age of 82. A family did not specify a cause of death here, only posting on Instagram, quote, "We are heartbroken to announce that our beloved father, Brian Wilson, has passed away. We are at a loss for words right now. Please respect our privacy at this time as our family is grieving. We realize that we are sharing our grief with the world." So that's the statement they shared. And while they did not specify a cause of death, we know that at least as of last year, there were legal representatives who said that Mr. Wilson had been suffering from a dementia-like disorder. They called it a major neurocognitive disorder, and they suggested that he be placed in a conservatorship. So, of course, more on that to come. In the meantime, today, folks across the world and here in the Carolinas, too, are reflecting on Mr. Wilson's legacy and really just the importance that the music of the Beach Boys has had on American culture. One of those folks, certainly reflecting today, we've got, I guess we could say, one of the biggest fans in the entire world, maybe. We've got David Beard, who's a local gentleman who also happens to run Endless Summer Quarterly, which is the official Beach Boys fan publication. And David, you've been doing this since the 1990s, and you were also involved with co-producing one of the more recent new recordings with the band, which is super special. And so I hope that we can talk about that a bit as we go on throughout this conversation. But I guess first and foremost, how are you feeling today? What are your thoughts as we've learned now of the passing of Mr. Wilson?
Well, it's really unique. It's such a beautiful day outside today. When I went out and got in my car and was driving, I just started thinking about California, even though I'm in the Carolinas. I was just driving along and just kind of reflecting on what a beautiful day it is. And it just made me appreciate the music of the Beach Boys that much more.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think about, the summer vibes, right? That's just like the iconic sound. And I think, when we think about summer, there are so many people who think about that music and the iconic voices too. And yeah, I mean, just a lot of people thinking probably too, just about how this group kind of revolutionized and added in special ways to music culture here in the U.S. I guess what made you such a huge fan of the Beach Boys? I mean, I have to imagine it's some of that sound, but what really drew you to this group?
Well, oddly enough, a music duo by the name of Jan and Dean. I don't know if many people know who they are anymore, but Jan and Dean were very similar to the Beach Boys in that they did car songs and surfing songs and songs about girls and, going down to the beach. And Jan and Dean were actually a doo-wop duo out of California. They would play Dick Clark's American Bandstand when that was still based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Jan and Dean, because they were first, they had several doo-wop songs that the Beach Boys picked up on right away. And you hear that replicated in the Beach Boys' first song ever, Surfin', with the balm, dip, 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 dip. They took that, they kind of borrowed that from Jan and Dean, and they became fast friends. They would do shows together out there, and lo and behold, I discovered Jan and Dean through the television movie Dead Man's Curve, which aired. I discovered it sometime in early '80, I think is when I saw it on its second airing. And it was about this culture, these two guys who met in high school, and they went on to create this music. And there's a moment in that TV special where the actors playing Jan and Dean were standing at the shore with the surfboards, and the one playing Jan says to the one playing Dean, "This would sound so great on tape," and they end up cutting right to them in the studio with a montage of them in the studio and people surfing. And they're singing the song Surfin', which is a Beach Boys song. Now, back then, in 1980, I'll remind people that there was no internet. You kind of had to really, if you really found you liked something, you could go to the record store and you'd have to buy books. And I did that. And I quickly discovered the Jan and Dean Anthology album. And it was a 2-record set. It had a booklet inside. And it was all this stuff written about this guy named Brian Wilson. And then I'm looking at the credits of the songs, and lo and behold, the song Surf City, which was a #1 hit, Jan and Dean's only #1 hit, was co-written by this fellow named Brian Wilson. And that kind of led me down the rabbit hole. I just thought, well, man, I love this song Surf City. I like this song Drag City. He also co-wrote that. Let me find out more about these Beach Boy guys. And then it was those early '60s hits that kind of sucked me in. And then from there, by the time I was in my early 20s, and I discovered Pet Sounds. And when I had listened to Pet Sounds a couple of times on vinyl, on record, and it didn't really hit me the way that it eventually would. One day I was in my car, and I had Pet Sounds on in a cassette in my car, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I suddenly was transformed. Everything that was on every one of those songs, Wouldn't It Be Nice, God Only Knows, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, Caroline No, all that music suddenly kind of just enveloped me. And I was just changed forever. There was something different there. There was something significant, musically significant, that I didn't hear anywhere else. It didn't matter whether it was a pop song or a fun song or a surfing song. It wasn't so much what the music was about. It's what the music conveyed in the way that it felt when you listened to it.
Yeah, I think about, the versatility of the songs, and some of my personal favorites, it's hard to pick, and I feel like I loved all the songs that you just listed. But, I think about like Good Vibrations. That always just makes me feel happy. But then I think about In My Room, which is just so, I don't know, wistful, and I don't know, but I love that one as well. And I think kind of to your point about the emotion and speaking to the human experience, and maybe even the American experience too, of just being in your room and thinking.
Yeah, and Brian's genius. One of the things, I'm not someone who always would use through the 30 plus years that I've been doing Endless Summer Quarterly. I'm not that prone to using the word genius with Brian. But one of the things he did that no one else has ever done, and even Paul McCartney has bought a copy of Pet Sounds for every one of his children, because Paul McCartney has even said publicly you're not musically educated until you listen to Pet Sounds. So there'd be a song, I think it's Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulders, which has got beautiful string arrangements going on behind it. And Brian would purposely, if the song was in a certain key, he would purposely put in a major right at a certain moment in the song, just so that your ear, even though you wouldn't realize what you were hearing, the emphasis of what he was singing with the lyrics would be conveyed with just that key change for just that moment. And so he would go from a minor key to a major key just to kind of inherently communicate to the listener something different just occurred.
Yeah.
That matched the lyrical intention.
Yeah, a very, very amateur musician here, but being a former orchestra nerd, feeling, minor keys, that kind of melancholy. I get what you're saying, but the major keys kind of sweeten, bring a little bit more brightness, happiness. So I get what you're saying right there.
Yeah, and then you talk about, and he had so many. He was very lucky also. I want to point that out. Brian was very fortunate in that he had, in the very beginning, when they first started out, he had 4 voices. He had his cousin Mike Love, his younger brother Carl, their buddy Al Jardine, and Dennis, the other brother, Dennis Wilson. He was just kind of a very high energy guy. But Brian's very quickly, because this is true, and it's kind of hard to this day for me to wrap my mind around. The Beach Boys released 12 albums in 4 years. 12 albums. And that to me is astonishing. So they went very quickly through that progress of really simple, fun songs to really developed, meaningful songs. And so Brian worked with a number of lyricists. Roger Christian mostly did the car songs. Gary Usher worked on car songs and some of the other melancholy songs like In My Room. But his cousin, Van Dyke Parks, would work with Brian on the Smile sessions. And Tony Asher, who is a jingle writer that Brian befriended, worked with Brian on most of Pet Sounds. But the guy that who's going into the Songwriters Hall of Fame tomorrow is his cousin Mike Love. Brian got in the year 2000. Mike's going in tomorrow to join him. And I just think it's so fitting that this is happening now, because what Mike and Brian did together, you can Google that collaboration and the songs they wrote together, the number, the songs that have impacted our lives. There was something so special and unique, and I think Good Vibrations is the prime example of a song that just changed everything. It was released in October of '66, and it when I listen to it, even today, I'm reminded of its cultural significance. Not just, oh, wow, this is a really cool song. It's the cultural significance and how Brian managed to just introduce. That's jazz. If you listen to it, it's jazz. So he's got jazz, rhythm and blues, doo-wop, all in one song. and he took it, made it 3 minutes and 35 seconds, and he released it to the world. And Mike, with his quick adaptability to what Brian was pursuing, I just think to this day, I think Good Vibrations defines an era and defines a culture in music.
Yeah, absolutely iconic. You just referenced this, the Hall of Fame, and I know that was the latest issue that y'all just put out with Endless Summer Quarterly, so folks can certainly check out more there. There you go. Do you think you plan to have any sort of special editions or special updates now that we've learned the news of today?
Oh yeah. One of the things that I've been doing that I started at the winter edition of last year, so it started with this edition and then this edition, is I wanted to get into it. Surprised me. I think last summer I started looking and I thought, I know Brian did a lot of work outside of the Beach Boys, production-wise and arrangement, and in some cases writing with other artists. And I just was really surprised that there wasn't really a concise, when I went and Googled, you can find anything these days. I was really surprised to learn that there just wasn't that much out there for us to kind of glean from, to learn. So I kind of set about interviewing, number one, people who are still here, and were there. So I ended up interviewing a woman named Cheryl Pomeroy. She was in the group Bob and Sherry. Bob and Sherry were the first thing that Brian produced in October of '63, if I'm remembering correctly, or '62. This goes way back. So he was doing things peripherally while he was releasing 12 albums in 4 years. He was also working with other artists. He worked with Glenn Campbell. I recommend people look up on YouTube the song Guess I'm Dumb, which was released in June of '65. It's Glenn Campbell singing it. It's a Glenn Campbell single, but Brian wrote, produced, and arranged it. And it would have ended up on Pet Sounds had it not been for, I think, the title. From my understanding, the group kind of took issue with Brian recording a song called Guess I'm Dumb. So, but Brian just was Brian. Brian was a very creative soul. He was more interested in the exploration of how he could communicate what he was feeling and what he was thinking. And so not only was he so fortunate in that he had the Beach Boys' voices, he was also very fortunate in that he got turned on to the Wrecking Crew through Jan Berry of Jan and Dean. And the Wrecking Crew is kind of a nickname for the best LA studio session musicians of the time, which consisted, I'll leave somebody out accidentally, but there was a lot of them. Glenn Campbell was one, Hal Blaine on drums, Carol Kay, who's going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year. She's a famous bass player. She's on a number, including Good Vibrations, a number of songs. Tommy Tedesco, Don Randy, Tommy Morgan, the list goes on and on. These were the quill of LA musicians, and they ended up getting the nickname The Wrecking Crew because Hal Blaine put out a book called called Becoming the Wrecking Crew. So that's how that moniker kind of stuck. But Brian had them at his disposal because he quit touring in December of '65. So the Beach Boys kept touring as a group and a unit. Brian stayed home. He had these great LA musicians at his disposal. He'd squeeze them into a studio. And in those days, you didn't have Pro Tools or anything like that. You had 8 tracks to work with. And so Brian would have all the musicians next to each other, and the instruments would kind of bleed into the room. So he would have this kind of really full, lovely, cushiony sound, like, God only knows is a perfect example of that, because he had everybody so close to one another, the instruments would kind of bleed. So he had the greatest voices in the industry as far as I'm concerned. I mean, those voices, that blend, I'll remind people that at the end of '66, the Beach Boys were voted the #1 vocal group in Britain over the Beatles. So that's something of significant. Yeah, that's significant. And I think #3 were the Rolling Stones. So the Beach Boys were #1 in Britain over the Beatles. So that vocal blend was unmatched and unparalleled. And Brian had those voices at his disposal to sing kind of his dreams, because whatever he could come up with, the Wrecking Crew helped him. The Beach Boys would come back from touring. They'd go into the studio. He'd play them these incredible tracks, and they would put their voices on them, and you had magic. And to Brian's credit, he always knew. By '65 and '66, he always knew when to listen. He was not a demanding guy. He knew what he wanted. But one of the things I credit him with, if you ever listen to, I'll hold this up. This is the one that came out in '97, but a more recent one came out in 2016. The Beach Boys Pet Sound Sessions box set. There's a whole disc of Brian just working with musicians, and there's moments in songs where they'll make a suggestion to him, and he'll say, "Play that again," or "Play what you're suggesting," and they will play it. And he'd go, yeah, let's try it once. And they would try it. And if he liked it, he'd say, yeah, let's do that. Okay, let's run it that way. And I think that takes a lot of, so he was never a pushy guy. He understood what he wanted, but he was never pushy, right? He was like a sponge. He wanted to know what, he trusted the people, these great LA musicians. He trusted them. He knew that their suggestions, because they'd been in the industry longer than he had, he knew to trust them. And I think that's a lesson to anybody, that you can, if you surround yourself with great players, let the great players play. Mm-hmm. And he was really wise in that respect, to kind of pay attention. And to recognize when an idea came in. There's even a session where somebody plays something by accident. Al DeLory plays something accidentally on one of the songs on Pet Sounds, and he stops the session and he says, "Wait a minute, what did you just do?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know." And he says, "Well, it was something like this." And he said, "Oh, can you play that again?" And he tries to replay. He goes, "Yes, that's it, right there." And then they end up with that in the song. So I really do credit Brian for just having that. One, to have the imagination to come up with the tracks that he did, mm-hmm. but also that trust in the musicians. And then when the guys, the other Beach Boys returned from the road, and him plugging them into the, on the vocals for the trust that he had in them as well.
Yeah. I mean, definitely a special quality to have, considering what music history has shared about band dynamics and how sometimes that can be a really fraught with peril situation. Yeah. I'd love to talk about, if we could, last time we heard from you, you were in Fort Mill. I presume you're still there. Okay.
No, I'm Charlotte, not far away. Just about 7 miles. No, I've moved away. I moved to a bigger place, but I'm still pretty close.
Oh, gotcha. Well, welcome to Charlotte. Obviously, you've talked about the fact how you started as a super fan. You ended up in charge of the Endless Summer Quarterly. I alluded to this at the beginning of our conversation here, the fact that eventually you got to co-produce one of the more recent recordings. How did that come about, and what was that like in being able to work and have such a big rapport with the band?
Well, the first word that comes to mind is trust. It's something that there's all sorts of, cliches, I guess, that are coming to mind, and flowery, nice words, and they would be true. It's been a privilege to be in their company, and an honor to be able to be able to be in their company, whether it's over the phone, sitting with them, sharing dinner, you name it. And I'm still a super fan. But so that came about because in 1970, the group released an album called Sunflower. And people may not know that record off the top of their heads because it's not in the lexicon of greatest hits. But there's a song on there that I think most people know pretty well, and that's Forever. And that was written by the band's drummer, Dennis Wilson. It became popular again in the 80s because of John Stamos and Full House. Mm. But that's where that song is from. I just referenced that song so that you'll have kind of a reference point. Another song on that album is Add Some Music to Your Day. And I was working on the 50th anniversary edition of ESQ, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the album Sunflower. And I interviewed the guys. I got interviews with Brian, Mike, Al, and Bruce Johnston. And I was looking at the album cover, and on the album cover, it's the Beach Boys with their kids sitting on a hill, which was actually Dean Martin's property, from what I understand. Mm. And it was interesting to me. I thought, well, gosh, look at these kids. They're all musical now. There's Carney, she's musical. Over here, there's Christian, that's Mike's son. He's musical. There's Haley, I think she's music. So it was kind of, my brain started working and thinking, I wonder, because this was summer of 2020, we were in the middle of the pandemic and everything was just, ground to a halt. And I just started thinking about, I wonder, since nobody's out doing anything, I wonder if I could kind of get some wheels turning on this idea to re-record this song. And then if I'm going to have everyone do that, what would it be for? Because it just seemed to me to do something. If you're going to take the time to ask people to do something, then what's the end goal? You know, what would we say? How could we do this to benefit someone? And by that time, I don't remember when he released it, but Mike Love had released a song called, I think, "This Too Shall Pass," I think was the name of the song, and it was to benefit Feeding America. And so I thought, well, okay, they're America's band, Feeding America. That worked for me. And I just slowly started reaching out, and it seemed like there was enough interest there to do it. And musician extraordinaire Rob Bonfiglio, who's Carney Wilson's husband, he's just if he was born back in the 60s and lived in LA, he would have been one of the Wrecking Crew. He's so good. He can play anything. You ask him to do a song, he can play every instrument. He can do it all. So that's where we started. And Rob created the track, and he created, demo vocals for everybody, like scratch vocals for everyone to listen to. And I'm in a church choir. I'm a first tenor in my church choir. So what was different for me was, number one, was that the Beach Boys' original recording didn't have any female vocals on it. So I had to think in terms of, okay, this isn't just tenor, because the Beach Boys are all tenors except for Mike Love, who can sing both tenor and bass. So I thought, okay, Carney and Wendy and Mike Love's daughters, Haley and Amba, I thought, okay, I have to listen to some of their music to understand whether they're altos or sopranos, and then whether or not they're soprano 1, soprano 2, alto 1, or alto 2, to kind of sort out where they would be best utilized vocally. So that kind of took some understanding, but it was so much fun to kind of delegate that to say, hey, how about this spot for you? And then them all being very excited to do it. And then Bruce Johnston, who joined the Beach Boys in 1965, left in early 70s and came back in 79, and he's been in the touring band with Mike ever since. He was great. He was kind of the producer's producer, for lack of a better way of putting it. He was so instrumental in helping me accomplish it. He would just kind of guide me. We'd talk on the phone, and he'd say, okay, well, you need the track. You need it to be in its original key. And then once I accomplished that with Rob, he said, okay, here's now what you should do next. And he kind of walked me through it great, because I was a morning show producer once at Magic Oldies 96 way back in the day when I was on the corner of Kings and Moorhead, but I'd never undertaken anything like this. So it was a little different, but it was so much fun. And it was a great kind of diversion during the pandemic, because I think if I just sat through the pandemic like everyone else, it would have been very difficult for me. It was difficult for me, and I know that it was difficult for many people. So the whole goal became, how do we create a little joy? And so by the time we got into early 2021, the track had been completed. Everyone did their vocal parts. Rob did a great job of mixing it. And then somebody, I think around November of 2020, somebody said, well, why don't you get a video together? And I had so much, it was quite a challenge, a welcome challenge, just to get everybody to do their vocal parts. And I thought, oh boy, I don't know. But everyone, again, when time permit, they all got to it, and they did it. And Brian's not on it. And we're talking about Brian passing away. If you were to watch the video, there's great, I'm going to get sidetracked a little bit, going all the way back to when I started with Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys in the beginning and how I discovered them. Mm-hmm. My youth minister at the time at St. John's Episcopal Church, where I now sing in the choir off Carmel Road, he got me into the Beach Boys too. He started turning me on to certain albums. To pay him back for that, I put him in the video. There's a lyric in the song, the preacher adds it to his psalms, and that's him, his father, Paul Martin. I wanted to kind of thank him, so I put him in there. And I also, because Brian wasn't doing any recording at the time, I tried to figure a way to thank Brian visually, that if he saw the video, that he would feel, hopefully kind of a love letter, for lack of a better way of putting it. So his brothers are in there. There's a lyric that says, at a movie, you can feel it touching your heart. And we were able to use old footage of both Dennis and Carl. And that was just a great, a great way for me to incorporate visually everybody. So it was my hope that Brian did see the video. I don't know if he did. He wrote the song. He co-wrote the song with Mike. So again, it's another great example of a great song written by one of the greatest songwriters of our time. And so yeah, it was a love letter. My video, being able to put that video together, was my way of sending Brian a love letter. Because, I mean, there's. I was talking to my buddy earlier about the Mount Rushmore of music icons, and we were saying, well, Brian would be on there for sure. And I said, well, wait a minute. I think Brian is just so great. I think Brian would be above the Mount Rushmore, and then you'd have the Paul McCartney and the Elton Johns and the Paul Simons, whoever else you would put on there. But I think Brian is still up here. And I think Paul McCartney would agree, because he's the one who said you're not musically educated until you get pet sounds. So there's kind of a consistency there with how great this guy is and how much he touched our lives. It's, I don't think you can. I use the word legacy today, past tense, because Brian just left us. I don't know if you can really implement the word legacy while you're still here. You probably can work it in some way, but I think Brian's legacy is, or at least a component of his legacy. I think his legacy is many things. I think one of the major components of his legacy is his ability to touch people through his music and how he communicated through music. Don Was, who worked with Brian a number of times, told me in an interview back in 2015, he said, that's the way you talk to Brian. You talk to Brian through music. That's how you communicate with him. There's a song on Brian's. I grabbed a couple of albums here. One I just want to recommend this record to everyone. Yeah. This is called Brian Wilson Reimagines Gershwin. This was released in 2010. Brian was contacted by the Gershwin estate. Now just consider that right there. Wow. The George and Ira Gershwin estate. He did a number of songs, and he completed 2 unfinished Gershwin songs.
Wow.
He completed them. And I got to tell you, this is worth every second. So it's Brian Wilson Reimagines Gershwin from 2010. I'm sure it's out there on streaming platforms. Check this out. And then the other one, where I was talking to Don Was this one called No Peer Pressure. I don't know if you can see that, but No Peer Pressure. And there's a song on it, and the song is called The Last Song. And Don was talking to me about they had a filming crew there, and Don is playing the song, and he's playing the last song, and he's getting all kind of, choked up. And he said he's got snot coming out of his nose, and the camera's coming around filming him while he's trying to keep it together. Gosh. He said, Dave, it was just so difficult because they got cameras around you, and you're doing all you can to not be pulled into this message. Like, Brian literally wrote a song called The Last Song, and another song, I haven't listened to it quite yet today because I think maybe I'll cry.
Yeah.
In 2012, the Beach Boys did a reunion tour, and they put out the album That's Why God Made the Radio. And one of the songs at the end of the album is called Summer's Gone, and Brian sings it. And it's very moving, and it's interesting. I know the official day of summer is June 21st, but I think from now on, the remainder of years that I'll be here, I think June 11th is going to be my first day of summer, because Brian changed so many lives. he and the Beach Boys, what they've done. It's again, I just think about, there is the surf culture, there's the car culture, there's the girls down on the beach culture, there's fun, I Get Around, all those wonderful, recognizable songs. But boy, oh boy, did he just changed. He changed me. You have to be born. You do. You're born with that type of thing. You don't learn it. You're born with it. And Brian was born with a really, really special gift. And everyone's life he touched through his music and through his expression. Yeah, through his expression. It's why we're talking about him. I mean, and why he's at the. I mean, they should. I don't know, if they erected a statue the same size as the Statue of Liberty and it was a Brian Wilson statue, I'd be okay with it. I mean, he's deserving. I mean, he's America. I mean, and again, I'm certainly not giving him all the credit, but he is the foundation of everything that kind of came out of that group. And there's another song, if anyone saw the movie Love and Mercy from 2015, great movie that starred Paul Dano and John Cusack as Brian in different phases of his life. Mm-hmm. That's a really good film. And the song Love and Mercy is something from Brian's 1988 first solo album. And it's a song that you referenced in my room earlier. I think Love and Mercy is a lot like that song. It's that Brian understanding sadness and trying to kind of rescue us with it, with his music, taking the sadness and writing and recording in such a way that we understand the sadness, we connect to the sadness, but we hear the intention, which is really more about celebrating life, as allowing your heart to be on full display, and letting kind of. When I listen to that song, I feel like I'm listening to a flower bloom. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of his music does that.
David Beard, you've had so many wonderful insights for us tonight. Thank you. And really have given us a lot to think about as far as our playlist, too, going forward as folks try to think about Brian Wilson's legacy. Folks, check out Endless Summer Quarterly, of course, if you want more Beach Boys insights. And maybe we'll all be listening to a little bit more Beach Boys tonight in Brian's honor.
Oh, I hope so.
David, thanks for joining us here on Live Impact News. We definitely want to have you back.
Okay, I'd love to. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Have a great night. Folks, thanks so much for sticking with us here on Live Impact News. As we kind of alluded to as we kick things off at the top of the hour, we've got a few stories that we've been following for you tonight. Of course, we're going to get to some of the protest feeds that we're seeing in just a bit. But first, we want to talk about this local story and that big update that we just got today. For folks who have been following the Wadesboro Police K9 Blitz situation that started back in April, we've got some new information to share. And it's regarding some of the court action, legal action that we're seeing on this front. And as we talked about, our Tradisha Woodard has been keeping an eye on all of the twists and turns. Not only what's been coming out of court, Tradisha has gone to Wadesboro for meetings that have centered around what happened to K9 Blitz. We want to bring in Tradisha right now, who's joining us in the Live Impact News studio. So Tradisha, first and foremost, because this is such a convoluted story, what can you tell us about what we now know about how K9 Blitz died? Because there were kind of some changing stories, different stories, and you have been able to piece together through various means a better picture. So walk us through what happened with K9 Blitz.
Yeah, so to quickly bring you guys up to speed, we know that K9 Blitz was murdered back in April, but the question surrounding the death is what really stirred up lots of frustration within the community. So it started off with a public hearing, lots of folks speaking out, saying that he was an officer. How did he die? What protocols were followed? What protocols were not followed? And then we heard from the chief for the very first time, who said all protocols were followed. He talked about the bite apprehension following the suspect, and then that's all we had, right? Then suddenly, a month later, we get a recording. The recording has Chief Eschard, which we confirmed was him. I called him, he said it was him, basically saying that dog was murdered. Protocols were not followed. I am upset. I tried to push for charges. The DA did not push for charges. It was out of my hand. I was told to sweep things under the rug. So after that audio got leaked, the community was at uproar. Like, what's happening? Where is the transparency? Where is the accountability? Now, shortly after K9 Blitz's death, Jason Eschard, which was the former chief interim of the Wadesboro Police Department, he basically filed a lawsuit against Josh Harrington. Josh Harrington is the K9 trainer who donated the dog to the police station. So he basically said that Josh Harrington went on Facebook, he filed a lawsuit pushing for defamation of character. So today, now Harrington filing that lawsuit, not just only coming for Eschard, but also the Wadesboro Police Department in the town of Wadesboro. So lots of legal action taking place in this small town.
Yeah, and I mean, we've known, by speaking at least to Mr. Harrington, because, we hear different stories from different sides, but I know you've spoken with Mr. Harrington, and he told you that he donated Blitz to the police department. He says Blitz was not supposed to be an apprehension dog, and we mentioned this before, but we'll remind you again for folks who are just joining us. Blitz died during the apprehension of a suspect, but at the time we didn't know who might have killed Blitz. And Mr. Harrington, had talked about the fact that Blitz was put in a situation he wasn't trained to handle.
Yeah.
There was an allegation that Blitz might have turned around and tried to bite one of the officers, and it was maybe one of the officers who unloaded their gun into Blitz.
Yeah, and in our last story, we actually heard from the handler, Blitz's handler, as she spoke with officials. She talked about how Blitz was only doing his job. She said that she asked for him to bite the toy, but he kind of bit her arm, and she was trying to get help, and the officer stood there, and I think one of them tased Blitz. She says Blitz sat, she told him to go in command, she told him to lie down, and that's what he did. But she said he's also trained to come back to his owner. And as he did that, all of the officers were freaking out. And she was like, no, he's coming back to me, he's coming back to me. She told him to sit. He sat, he waited, and then he's trained to go back to his handler. And she was very emotional. She said it shouldn't have happened. She said that his life was valuable, and that had the proper protocols been followed, he would still be here today. So even she herself, obviously injured, she lost her job, but she did talk a lot about just how so many protocols were missed, so many protocols weren't followed, so that last time he got up and tried to come to her, that's when about 33 rounds was fired.
Wow.
And eventually killing Blitz. So the community still very frustrated about this, still demanding answers, and now Harrington going even further to file a lawsuit against a lot of folks, basically trying to find somebody to hold accountable for this, saying that, yes, we heard from Eschard in this audio recording that was leaked, but you guys never came out and told the truth, and that's what we still want, the truth. So that's what he's pushing for. Tonight's story is just going to talk a little bit about his efforts to hold those responsible accountable, and really breaking down those lawsuits and the goal, the mission, not only for Blitz, but for the community, transparency. We also kind of talked a little bit about officers, Wadesboro officers. The staff is continuing to shrink. I did speak with the police station asking them, does this have anything to do with Blitz? They say, we can't contribute all of it to Blitz, but we're pretty sure it has a lot to do with that. And that's just a lot of people asking for transparency. So that's what we're going to kind of dive into tonight in our story.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of alluded to this, the fact that Mr. Eschard is now former interim. There's a new, and I believe she's an interim as well, but there's a new person who's in charge. And it seems like the goal here is to try to rebuild some of the trust with the community with this new leadership.
I sent them over a list
Yeah.
of questions, just asking them about just a variety of different things. I was told that they'll be setting up a media release soon, and they'll be allowing us to come out sometime next week to get a lot of answers to these questions. But I did hear from a few sources that the Wadesboro Police Department, as of right now, has less than 5 officers, with 2 of them potentially also leaving and announcing their leave as well. So once again, can't confirm that it's all necessarily connected to Blitz. Can't confirm that number. Wadesboro Police is right now writing up me a statement. I asked them specifically how many people they had on staff, but it's a lot going on, and of course they're trying to rebuild. The new interim is trying to rebuild, and hopefully we'll get some of those questions answered next week.
Wow. All right, Tradisha, thank you so much for staying on top of this story, because I know, as you've seen firsthand, the community, they are very invested in what happens here. And
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot to talk about. All right, thanks for joining us here on Live Impact News.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll see Tradisha's story once again at 11 o'clock tonight, so keep it here on WCNC+. All right, folks, we got a lot to talk about going forward. We mentioned the fact that there are protests that have been underway. We know that there are some complaints from some of these protesters, not only about the immigration raids, the ICE operations ramping up. There are some complaints from some of these protesters we're hearing talking about how the president has deployed troops to respond to the protests. We're also hearing from the administration side of things. We have White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who talked about this topic and others during today's White House press briefing. So let's listen in. And once again, as we see more feeds come in, we'll break in here on Live Impact News with the very latest.
Good to see you all. What we have seen transpire in Los Angeles, California in recent days is shameful. Left-wing radicals waving foreign flags viciously attacked ICE and Border Patrol agents, as well as Los Angeles police officers. These criminals injured police, threw rocks at police cars and officers, burned vehicles, shut down freeways, and lobbed Molotov cocktails, all because the Trump administration was removing violent criminal illegal aliens from the city. These attacks were aimed not just at law enforcement, but at American culture and society itself. Rioters burned American flags, chanted "Death to ICE," and spray-painted anti-American slogans on buildings. But President Trump will never allow mob rule to prevail in America. The most basic duty of government is to preserve law and order, and this administration embraces that sacred responsibility. Democrats like Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass shamefully failed to meet their sworn obligations to their citizens. They didn't have the courage to do the right thing and protect law-abiding Californians from rioters. That's why President Trump deployed the National Guard and mobilized Marines to end the chaos and restore law and order. The mob violence is being stomped out. The criminals responsible will be swiftly brought to justice, and the Trump administration's operations to arrest illegal aliens are continuing unabated. When the initial immigration enforcement actions took place on June 6th, Mayor Bass took to social media to say she was deeply angered by what has taken place. Mayor Bass then embarked on one of the most outrageous campaign of lies this country has ever seen from an elected official, blaming President Trump and brave law enforcement officers for the violence. She accused heroic American immigration and customs enforcement officers targeting illegal alien murderers, rapists, and pedophiles of, quote, sowing terror in communities and disrupting basic principles of safety in our city. Around the same time, Governor Newsom claimed that immigration enforcement actions were causing chaos. That's how radical Democrats have become. Their opposition to President Trump has forced them to side with illegal alien criminals in their communities and violent rioters and looters over law enforcement officers who are just doing their jobs. Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom fanned the flames and demonized our brave ICE officers. Instead of defending their city and their state, Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom claimed that in order for the riots and the violence to stop, ICE needed to leave and immigration raids must end. In other words, the position of the Democrat Party is that the federal government is not allowed to enforce our laws and to arrest and deport illegal alien criminals. They're attempting to use a violent mob as a weapon against their own constituents to prevent the enforcement of immigration law. This is deeply un-American and morally reprehensible. President Trump received a clear mandate from voters to reverse the illegal invasion ushered in by Joe Biden's open border and to end the lawlessness represented by Karen Bass in Gavin Newsom's California. President Trump promised to carry out the largest mass deportation campaign in American history, and left-wing riots will not deter him in that effort. Sanctuary cities and states will no longer be allowed to shield illegal criminals from deportation. Just take a look at some of the illegal monsters who were taken off the streets in Los Angeles in recent days. A Vietnamese national, a known gang member with a conviction for second-degree murder. A Mexican national with convictions for child molestation who was armed with a dangerous weapon and had previous arrests for robbery and domestic violence. A Filipino national with convictions of rape, assault, burglary, and theft. A Mexican national convicted of statutory rape, narcotics violations, and hit and run. A Nicaraguan national with convictions for domestic violence and hit and run, and a previous arrest for willful cruelty to a child. And an illegal alien from Mexico who was arrested after law enforcement officers during the thinking about copycatting the violence in an effort to stop this administration's mass deportation efforts. You will not succeed. Any lawlessness will only strengthen this president's resolve to defend the majority of Americans who want to live their lives peacefully, free from the fear of violent criminal illegal aliens. As President Trump said, order will be maintained and illegal aliens will be expelled from our country. In economic news, the latest Consumer Price Index inflation report came in today below expectations again. Since President Trump took office, inflation has come in below economics expectations every single month. Core inflation held steady and remains at the lowest level since March of 2021. Wage growth remains strong. The average private sector worker is on track to see their real earnings increase by around $1,200 adjusted for inflation. And prices continue to fall for everyday Americans. Energy prices fell from April to May. Gasoline has fallen each month since President Trump took office, down 12% over the past year. And prices for meat, poultry, eggs, and fish are all down from April to May as well. Under President Trump's strong leadership, America is beating Joe Biden's record-high inflation crisis. And once the One Big Beautiful bill passes, our economy will boom like never before. This bill is the largest tax cut for middle-class Americans in history. The One Big Beautiful bill gives a 15% tax cut to working Americans and families. We'll see increased take-home pay of $10,000 per year. The One Big Beautiful bill expands the child tax credit to $2,500 for more than 40 million American families with children. And the One Big Beautiful bill cuts taxes for overtime workers, saving them nearly $2,000 per year, and ends taxes on tips, saving tipped workers nearly $2,000 per year as well. All of these provisions are broadly popular with an overwhelming support from the American people. We need Republicans in Congress to finish the job and send the One Big Beautiful bill back to President Trump's desk for his signature as soon as possible. With that, we'll get to questions. I'm sure you have many of them today. Here in our new media seat is Elizabeth Mitchell, the White House correspondent for the Daily Signal, who's not afforded a seat in this room, but today she is. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I have two questions, if that's okay. First, a few Republicans on Capitol Hill are suggesting that President Trump scale back deportations, even as ICE is reportedly gearing up for raids in 5 more Democrat-led areas. Would anything dissuade President Trump, and would he consider sending in Marines if anti-ICE violence occurs in these cities?
Well, I think I may have just answered both of your questions with my opening monologue. The Trump administration is going to continue the mass deportation effort that the president promised the American public. Many of you were at those rallies in cities and communities across the country when the president spoke about his commitment to removing violent illegal criminals and anyone who has broken our nation's immigration laws from American communities. And God bless our ICE and Border Patrol who are working hard on that effort. This administration is going to continue that. And it's part of the reason we do need the One Big Beautiful bill to pass as well, may I add, because the bill provides funding to hire more ICE agents and Border Patrol agents, more personnel on the ground to conduct this important public safety work.
Thank you. And on another topic, President Trump has indicated that aides to former President Biden who used the auto pen to sign major orders and pardons should be investigated for potential crimes. Does he think that Biden allowing or at least being negligently unaware of this activity was an impeachable offense?
I haven't heard the president address whether it's an impeachable offense, but it could perhaps be a criminal offense, especially on behalf of staffers who may have been utilizing the president's signature without his authority or consent. I understand that Republicans on the Hill are moving in the right direction to call attention to this and to bring in some former White House staffers who clearly knew more than they ever shared and never addressed with the American public. And so we look forward to seeing where this investigation continues, and I know the Department of Justice is also looking into the matter as well. Alex, good to see you today.
Good to see you, Caroline. Thank you. You mentioned foreign flags being blown during these protests. There are protest activities being organized for this weekend. Part of it are Democrats saying they want to reclaim the American flag. It's also being titled No King's Day. Does the president see himself as a king, and does the White House expect to see American flags being flown during these protests this weekend?
The president views himself as the president of the United States of America. This is a constitutional republic, and we want to see all of our citizens be proud of the country in which they are given the privilege and the blessing to live. And I think that those images of foreign flags being waved with, by illegal criminals and by violent rioters in the face of cars blowing up and of flames in the city. I have photos of that here to show you. With this violence and destruction that occurred is an image that Governor Gavin Newsom owns. This is his city, and President Trump saw these images and he said that is not going to be accepted or tolerated, and hence why he deployed the National Guard and United States Marines who have helped to quell that violence.
If I can ask another.
Sure.
If the president does end up deploying any National Guard members, perhaps Marines, to blue states, would he be in contact with the governors prior to this? Would it be necessary?
Well, President Trump was in contact with Governor Gavin Newsom despite some of the claims he's made in the last couple of days. The president called the governor on Friday evening and told him to let law enforcement in California do their jobs. And the Los Angeles Police Department, by the way, are fantastic people. They are trying to do the work that they've so bravely signed up to do to enforce the law, but they have been kneecapped by incompetent Democrat policies and Democrat politicians who do not allow their local law enforcement to correspond and coordinate with federal immigration authorities. And so President gave Gavin Newsom a warning and said, get it together. 24 hours later, we saw more images like this. We heard about Border Patrol agents who were being the target of rocks. These illegal criminals were throwing rocks at our Border Patrol and ICE agents, and so the president made the decision to federalize California's National Guard. Stephanie.
Thank you. Two questions on the China trade deal, if I may.
Sure.
First, will the president formally sign the trade deal, and if so, when? Secretary Lutnick sort of alluded to the fact that it might be in a couple of days, but I'm curious if there's anything more specific to read out.
Sure. I do have more specifics for you. I spoke to the president about this. He spoke to his trade team, who did a fantastic job negotiating this on behalf of the United States and meeting with their Chinese counterparts. The president is talking to them about the details of it now. But what the president heard, he liked. China has agreed to open their markets to the United States separately of this deal. And when it comes to this deal, we're going back to the terms that were agreed upon in Geneva for the release of some of those critical minerals and the magnets from China to the United States. And we have agreed to fully comply with the Geneva Agreement as well. So the president is reviewing the details of that with his trade team now, and you'll hear more from him, I'm sure.
And then the second question, on tariffs, Secretary Lutnick suggested that the tariffs would remain unchanged with China. I'm wondering if there's any room for them to negotiate even lower, or if this is the floor.
I won't get ahead of any further negotiations. We're in a great place right now, and I would add that this is the result of a lot of hard work from the president and his team, and the president has a good and respectful relationship with President Xi, and as you know, they had a direct conversation which led to this success that the president announced on Truth Social this morning. JJ.
On North Korea, has the president tried to resume dialogue with Kim Jong-un? There's some reporting that the president sent a letter and tried to give it to Kim Jong-un through some North Korean diplomats through the UN, and they declined to take it and send it to Kim Jong-un?
The president remains receptive to correspondence with Kim Jong-un, and he'd like to see the progress that was made at that summit in Singapore, which I know you covered in 2018 during his first term. As for specific correspondence, I'll leave that to the president to answer. Sure.
Good afternoon. Yeah, thanks. Back to the trade deal negotiations with China. Jimmy Lai, as you know, is a pro-democracy advocate, Catholic, sitting in solitary confinement in Hong Kong as we speak. His family believes he may be close to death. Did his name come up, Jimmy Lai's name come up in these negotiations with China?
Not to my knowledge. I understand the negotiations were very much focused on our trade and economic relationship with China.
Does the president believe he can free Jimmy Lai from prison?
I'll check with the president. It's certainly an important issue, and I'll get back to you.
Thanks, Caroline. The president said yesterday that paid insurrectionists were behind or involved in the protests in Los Angeles. Does the White House have any more details about who they believe is paying these protesters?
The president spoke about this last night when he returned from Fort Bragg, because frankly the president has a lot of common sense. And if you look at some of the imagery that we have received from the Department of Homeland Security and ICE and law enforcement who are on the ground, you will see boxes and boxes of very professionalized masks and rioting equipment being dropped off for these protesters. So it's a good question the president is raising, and one we are looking into, about who is funding these insurrectionists and these rioters and these protesters and these illegal criminals. And I have updates for you on the numbers, by the way. Since June 6th, there have been 330 illegal aliens that have been arrested as part of these riots in Los Angeles. 113 of those illegal aliens had prior criminal convictions. And overall, and this includes arrests of American citizens, there's been 157 people arrested for assault and obstruction-related charges, including the attempted murder of a police officer with a Molotov cocktail. So who is funding these illegal aliens who are coming in with this very professional riot gear? It's a question everyone in this room who cares about truth should be asking. And we encourage your help in trying to get to the bottom of that question. Indita.
Thank you, Caroline. About Elon Musk, he issued an apology this morning. Has the president accepted the apology, or does he think it's too little too late?
The president acknowledged the statement that Elon put out this morning, and he is appreciative of it, and we are continuing to focus on the business of the American people.
And has the administration started a review of Musk's government contracts, something that the president said he's considering?
What do you mean by that?
Has the administration started a review of the contracts that Musk and his companies currently have?
No efforts have been made on that front as far as I'm aware.
Okay. And just one more, if I may, on just everything sort of we've seen so far with the president's response to the LA protests. There is criticism that seems to suggest that the president responded the way he did because it was a deliberate, calculated attempt to sort of shift focus away from his feud with Musk. How would you respond to that?
The president responded to the LA riots, condemning the violence
from Musk.
That's an incredibly disingenuous attack. The president saw images of Border Patrol and ICE agents being hailed with rocks and Molotov cocktails. He saw vehicles being burned to the ground with illegal aliens flying foreign flags, and that's what prompted the president to have this response that has clearly worked, because last night in Los Angeles you didn't see many of those images. And I would add the governor and the mayor need to actually do more. I know Gavin Newsom had a big address to the nation last night. I guess he thought that's what it was for maybe his future political ambitions, but he spoke a lot of words. We haven't seen action. California has been a mess for years because of the incompetence of Gavin Newsom, so the president was responding to that only. Caitlin.
Caroline, two questions for you.
Sure.
Over the weekend, Secretary Noem sent a memo to the Pentagon asking Secretary Hegseth to have and direct the military that's on the ground in LA to arrest and detain what she said were lawbreakers. Is the president okay with that? And under what authority would the members of the military be able to arrest people inside the United States?
I can't speak for a letter that came from the Department of Homeland Security. I can't speak for the president and what's currently happening on the ground now. And as you know, the president federalized the National Guard under U.S. Code 10, which he has the authority to do. And our United States Marines and the National Guardsmen and women who are on the ground right now are helping to create a peaceful environment for ICE and Border Patrol, who were being, again, hailed with rocks, who were being violently and viciously attacked. They needed reinforcements, and so our United States Marines who are on the ground are providing those reinforcements to ensure the environment is peaceful so that these raids and deportations can continue.
But he realizes they can't actually arrest people unless he invokes the Insurrection Act, which, I mean, seemingly was not something that was in Secretary Noem's memo, a clear distinction she did not make there.
Again, you're trying to conflate a letter that was sent to the Department of Homeland Security to the president's legal authority. The president understands the legal authority that he invoked, and that's the current situation right now.
When it comes to federalizing the National Guard, what is the specific criteria that the president is using for when he's deciding to do that, and in which states?
The president was asked and answered this yesterday. He wants to see an end to the chaos and the violence. He doesn't want to see law enforcement officers being attacked. He wants to see peace. He wants law-abiding Californians to be able to bring their kids to school, to be able to go to work without seeing this violence in the streets. That's what the president's hoping for, and that's why he's taken this action. John.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. Two questions on two separate topics. One has to do with the military parade taking place here in Washington this weekend. There's a lot of security around the White House complex, around the Capitol complex, even along the tidal basin. Is that just proactive? Are you expecting anything in particular in terms of unrest like we've seen in Los Angeles?
These are proactive security measures to protect those marching in the parade, many of whom will be veterans and our brave men and women in uniform and Gold Star families. There's going to be military families from around the country who are flying into this parade. And of course, it's to protect the spectators who will be enjoying this incredibly patriotic show on Saturday. And I hope you all join us there.
And then secondly, Secretary Pete Hegseth testified on the Senate side of the Capitol today.
Yes.
And he was asked about America's, the administration's view of Vladimir Putin's intentions. And specifically, it was asked whether or not his intentions go beyond, his territorial ambitions go beyond Ukraine. When that question was posed to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane replied that he does believe that his territorial ambitions go beyond Ukraine, but Secretary Hegseth says it's not clear at this point. How does the president view this issue?
The president has spoken on this. He said, as he calls it, he believes Ukraine was always the apple of Putin's eye. And he made it very clear to Putin in his first term not to invade Ukraine. Putin didn't invade Ukraine because of President Trump's peace through strength foreign policy agenda and the effective deterrence policies that he implemented in the first term. Unfortunately, because of the weakness and incompetence of the previous administration, Vladimir Putin made the decision to invade Ukraine. And now we have this brutal war, which the president is working very hard to end. Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Caroline. The president warned that any protests on Saturday would be met with force. Can you clarify what kind of protest President Trump does support or find acceptable?
The president absolutely supports peaceful protests. He supports the First Amendment. He supports the right of Americans to make their voices heard. He does not support violence of any kind. He does not support assaulting law simply trying to do their job. It's very clear for the president what he supports and what he does not. Unfortunately for Democrats, that line has not been made clear, and they've allowed this unrest and this violence to continue, and the president has had to step in.
What question? So if there were peaceful protests on Saturday for the military parade, President Trump would allow that?
Of course the president supports peaceful protests. What a stupid question. Raquel.
Thank you so much, Caroline.
Raquel, and then I can go to you, Francis. Go.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I have two questions. One about Israel. Yesterday, the U.S. ambassador to Israel said the U.S. no longer is pursuing the goal of an independent Palestinian state. Can you confirm that the president is no longer supporting a two-state solution? And is President Trump considering diplomatic action against countries who takes action against Israel during next week's UN conference?
Right now, the president views the situation in Israel and Gaza as deeply unfortunate and needing to end. And the president is realistic about the current state of affairs in this region of the world. And that's why the president has said the number one focus and priority of the administration is to release all of the hostages from Gaza and to end this conflict as soon as possible. The administration is still pushing very hard for the release of all the hostages. And as for what happens next, clearly Gaza is an uninhabitable place. It needs to be rebuilt with the help of our Arab partners, and the president wants to see that happen as well. Take a couple more.
Just one on the G7 engagement. President Trump is traveling there on Sunday. Other presidents beyond the G7 leaders are also going. President Lula from Brazil, President Sheinbaum from Mexico, and President Zelensky from Ukraine are also going. Do you have confirmation if President Trump is meeting any other leaders on the sideline of the G7?
Yes.
updates, about the engagement?
I can confirm there will be quite a few bilateral meetings between the president and other foreign leaders. The White House is still working very hard to finalize that schedule, and we will provide that for you as soon as we have it. Great.
Thanks, Caroline. Just back to the China trade deal, can you talk about the status of the export controls that the U.S. imposed? Are those no longer being imposed?
We are fully complying with the Geneva Agreement. Go ahead. Sure.
Thanks, Caroline. One foreign question for you and one domestic. The foreign, the president, of course, has said he would lift sanctions on Syria. Is there an executive order coming along soon to go do that? And is the president planning to try to get involved in any kind of a peace agreement between Israel and Syria that would disengage those two?
To the best of my knowledge, the Treasury Department took action after the president made that announcement in Saudi Arabia.
Okay. And then on the domestic side, you were just asked about the First Amendment rights issues. In the president's comments yesterday, though, he just said protesters would be strongly dealt with. In your list before, you referred to insurrectionists, rioters, and protesters together. Obviously, they're quite different from your earlier answer. I'm struck by the fact that the president has not at any point said the most important thing here is to protect the First Amendment rights of peaceful protesters. So I'm wondering, where in his hierarchy of interests does he place that? Is the First Amendment protection the most important? Is stopping violence most important? Why is he not out saying all peaceful protesters will be protected?
I think two things can be important at the same time. And the president, as I just answered, supports the right of Americans to peacefully protest. He supports the First Amendment. But that is not the majority of the behavior that we have seen taking place in Los Angeles. We have seen mobs of violent rioters and agitators assaulting law enforcement officers, assaulting our federal immigration authorities. And we have seen, as I said, this goes back to what this administration is trying to do and accomplish, and that's enforcing law and order in our nation's communities, and it's removing public safety threats from communities in Los Angeles.
You're saying the majority have not been peaceful, the majority have been violent.
I just read for you the arrest numbers. We've arrested nearly 400 illegal aliens alone, just illegal aliens who have been arrested in these riots since June 6th, since they began.
Thousands of people on the streets.
Yeah, and we've had hundreds of people who have assaulted law enforcement officers. Are you saying that that's that's appropriate behavior?
No,
are you
no,
saying
I'm not
that
saying
the
that at all.
president
I'm
should
just
take
trying
action?
to figure out.
The Democrat governor and the Democrat mayor of Los Angeles have failed their citizens, and the majority of Americans, the majority of Californians, do not want to see law enforcement officers being assaulted in the streets. And thankfully, the president took action and stepped in to protect our federal law enforcement agents, to protect federal buildings, to protect the federal mission of deporting illegal criminals off of our streets. And that mission will continue every day as far as we're concerned. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Caroline.
So there you hear it, that update from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today. Of course, a couple of topics discussed there, including tariffs, but we primarily heard a lot of questions about the administration's response to all of the protests that we see continuing across the nation. In fact, we're seeing some live images here on Live Impact News coming to us from North Carolina's capital. So Raleigh folks have been gathering, hundreds marching through the streets tonight and gathering in a local square where they say that they are protesting the Trump administration's immigration enforcement. We know that not only are they protesting that, but also of note, we actually shared this with you. Our Julie Kay covered some legislative movement at the General Assembly today that is also playing into and tying into this immigration discussion, and that is North Carolina lawmakers moving along this bill that would require state and local government agencies to cooperate further with ICE operations. And so that is actually Senate Bill 153, now sitting on Governor Josh Stein's desk. So we know that folks are also protesting, just as we saw last night in Raleigh, that measure as well. By the way, our Julie Kay, who told us in her report earlier this evening, reached out to the governor's office, and we do not know if Governor Stein will sign this into law or will there be a veto. So we'll watch that very closely. But meantime, we do keep an eye on all of these protests. We talked about how Raleigh not the only city in North Carolina where protests have been underway or will be, because here in Charlotte, we've seen protests this week. We know this weekend there will be protests scheduled, not just in the city of Charlotte, but areas surrounding Charlotte. This all set to coincide with Saturday's military parade in Washington, D.C. President Trump saying that is going to honor the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, celebrate the U.S. forces, and you heard Caroline Leavitt there, the White House press secretary, talking about that a bit in her briefing, which we just shared with you a few moments ago. So we're going to keep an eye on things. As it stands tonight, we'll just remind you, 700 Marines, 2,000 National Guard troops deployed to Los Angeles. There have been around 200 arrests we've heard out of the LA area over recent days, and the tension between California leadership and LA leadership and the president and the Trump administration, the tension does continue to rise. We will, meantime, here as we watch some of these feeds develop, turn to a really important and interesting conversation from just last night here on Live Impact News. So we wanted to make sure that folks were hearing this message, because we have businesses and communities still trying to recover from Helene. If you can believe it, months and months, here we are hearing cries for help, pleas for help. At this point, Boone Area Chamber of Commerce coming to Charlotte here to speak with us in person and basically spreading the message. We're open for business. Come and see us. Your business, you coming to visit our businesses, will help us stay afloat. So let's listen here to my earlier conversation with President and CEO of Boone Area Chamber, David Jackson. After Helene, we've been doing some extensive reporting on the attempts to bounce back, and in some cases, yes, the recovery, the bounce back, but it's a slow-going process in some places, and in others, we're seeing the recovery is mostly underway. So we do want to make sure that we're constantly checking in with our high country to make sure how things are going. And we're very excited to have with us today David Jackson with the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce, of course, joining us from Boone, but coming all the way here to Charlotte to chat with us in person about how things are going, how small businesses are doing, what you're doing to support them, and how we can support small businesses too. So, David, thanks so much for making the trip here to Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks. I had to check out this heat that Brad's been talking about. So,
right, y'all don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's here for sure.
Yeah, the mountains have always been a haven for our household whenever the heat comes. But I feel like folks, anytime now, whatever the weather is, come on up, right? Y'all are open for business in Boone.
Yeah, that's right, and we've really made an extra emphasis on that, not only for Boone but the entire western region of the state. Certainly people are used to seeing the images of what went on back in September, but what they haven't necessarily gotten their heads wrapped around yet is what it looks like now. People have been very busy for the last 8+ months repairing, rejuvenating the area. Now that we are in the prime season for Boone, the outdoor economy always treats us well. And those river outfitters, those folks that guide you on the tubing trips, hiking guides, all of that, they have been incredibly busy making sure that those experiences are available. So whether that's all the way down in Cherokee on up to Sparta, those opportunities exist, and we want to make sure that people know that not only are tourism business.
Okay, folks, we want to break in here. We've got a brand new feed coming into our Live Impact studio. We're going to get back to the Boone Chamber in just a moment, but there is a press briefing that's starting just now out of California. 2 churches in the Downey area are speaking out after they say they were targeted for immigration raids. An elderly man arrested outside of one area, and then another man who was detained near a parking lot of a different church. So let's listen now as folks are giving an update on that situation.
We are part of a rapid response team, and we're going to keep responding when our gente is followed by immigration enforcement. When ICE is here in our neighborhoods and they think that it's okay for them to follow parents, hit their car, tear gas a vehicle when they have an infant and a toddler in the car, that is unacceptable. We're not going to take that. As you can see, we have people here who are also not okay with that. And until the migra is out, that's when they will have their peace. So I wanted to thank everybody here for being here, and I'm going to pass it over to Verita Topete, who is a witness, also a member of Centro CSO, who was there when this happened. Thank you, Verita.
Verita. My last name is Topete. Yes. This morning we were in our community minding our business when we saw this incident happen. My sister and I, we ran over we started recording. We're part of our rapid response. So immediately when we saw that they were ICE vehicles, we ran over, we started recording. By the time we got there, the mother was already outside of the vehicle. She was carrying her toddler child in one hand, and then her other hand, she had it raised up while the agents were pointing guns at her. She was unarmed, and they threw tear gas. Before we had arrived, we saw smoke, and it was from tear gas. We picked up after, and it was like a pretty big size canister of tear gas. We were there, I was recording, and I was letting her know that she didn't have to answer any questions, she didn't have to sign anything, and just to let her know that we were out here to support her and that she is not alone. My sister also was there. I don't want to speak too much about it because she also was there and she would like to say what she witnessed. She's the one that called me over, so we both ran over there to essentially help our community member and let her know that she wasn't alone. She was very distressed, so I'm hoping she's doing well now. Who's our next speaker? So can you say it in Spanish? My Spanish is not very good.
What would you like for me to say about the witness? Just like how you saw her with her infant?
Yeah, and that we were there to support her and letting her know that she wasn't alone. Absolutely. She was very stressed out.
So Verita, as a witness, said that the mother came out with a toddler in her arms. The toddler was very upset, crying, inconsolable, and so was the wife. We will not be releasing her.
I want you to say it in Spanish.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pensé que lo estaba haciendo en español. Ay, me disculpan. The bilingual. Lo que está diciendo Verita, como una, ¿cómo se dice witness?
Testiga.
Como testiga de lo que sucedió hace unas horas, fue de que la migra atropelló al carro y por supuesto que la esposa y su hijo estaban muy asustados y no estaba parando de llorar. Y pensamos que eso está muy mal, de que estén aterrorizando a nuestra gente. Así que estamos aquí para darles la voz a las personas que no pudieron venir hoy día y también a la esposa que no se la llevaron, pero que aún está aterrorizada después de que la dejaron aquí en la calle de la Whittier. Thank you.
All right, folks, bear with us here in the Live Impact News studio. We were having some issues with the feed. What we were hearing and what we were seeing in that 3-box, we're going to try to get back to, because we've got underway right now a press briefing that's happening in the Downey, California area. We heard just a bit, kind of a bilingual account of what happened with 2 raids at 2 different churches. Looks like we've got the feedback. We've also got the ICE protests in San Diego and in Raleigh. So we'll get back to the 3-box and listen back into this press conference in Downey, California.
The conduct of these federal agents is completely inexcusable. Completely. We have a family peacefully traveling in Los Angeles. A husband, a wife, 2 minor children, carrying on with their day. And all of a sudden they are rammed, boxed in, guns drawn, and hit with chemical agents. That is a scene straight out of a third world country. I thought this was the United States of America, but clearly this administration, this government is not following the rule of law. It's engaging in terror, violence, and acting outside the scope of its authority. Shame. And so we're here with community members, we're here with organizers, and me, myself, I plan on suing the federal government. That's right. These federal agents and these individuals involved for their unlawful, unconstitutional conduct that they engage in when they harmed this family, physically, mentally, and they also harmed this community. And so we're here saying that we're going to stand up, we're going to fight back lawfully through the courts, through our First Amendment rights, and through organizing. I've spoken with the family, and unfortunately, these minor children are so scared, so traumatized, so shaken to their core that they couldn't even be here today because of how scared they are. And so we're here representing the family, representing the community, calling out this unlawful conduct, and we're going to do whatever we can in our power to hold this government accountable through the courts, through our rights, and through organizing. Thank you. There's been a statement put out by the government. We believe it's a hit and run. We believe the federal government engaged in a hit and run when they boxed in, attacked this family, left the scene, and in fact, LAPD was investigating this as a hit and run. In response, the federal government said, oh, this person allegedly punched a federal agent. Is there any truth to that? Is there any video? Is there any proof? Or are we relying on the word of a government who is attacking its own people on its own soil? And so because this government has deployed troops within its own soil, it cannot be trusted. It cannot be relied upon. And we have to look at it with a grain of salt. And so while we have heard the statement, we have not seen any proof. We don't know whether it's true or not. But there are courts of law where we'll be able to see whether there's any truth behind that statement.
Do you know where Mr. Cerna has been taken? Is he currently being held by HSI or is he in a local station?
Mr. Cerna was what we call disappeared for some hours. A lot of people within federal custody, there's no record of, we don't know where they are, and they are disappeared by the federal government. That was the case with the individual, the male in this case. He allegedly is in custody, but we have not been able to confirm exactly in which federal custody and where exactly.
Have you been in contact with him since the detainment?
Not him personally, but with the wife. Sí. Not yet. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Cristian Contreras, C-H-R-I-S-T-I-A-N, Contreras, C-O-N-T-R-E-R-A-S. Hoy estamos tratando de defender la comunidad a base del terror que han hecho en la comunidad. Lo que miramos en este caso es que una familia que no estaba cometiendo un crimen, que estaba en su carro tratando de salir de su comunidad, los atacaron con carros, con agentes químicos, con armas letales que estaban apuntando contra ellos, sin justificación, sin una razón legal. Estamos hablando de una familia que no estaba cometiendo un crimen. Estamos aquí diciendo que lo que está haciendo este gobierno no es correcto, no es justo, no es legal, y vamos a proteger la comunidad, vamos a proteger la familia que atacaron y vamos a decidir que vamos a demandar este gobierno por lo que hicieron. I know there's a 6-month-old and a toddler, anywhere, and a 6-year-old.
And boys, girls?
There's two boys, I believe. It's 2 boys.
Bear with us, please, and thank you so much for your patience as we work on some of the feeds. We were having some issues with that feed out of Downey, California, but you heard there various folks calling out what they see as an injustice in how they believe that these two churches were targeted for immigration raids in that city. So we're going to work on trying to get that feedback as well as the feed that we were watching out of Raleigh. But meantime, we still have this one for you. This is out of San Diego. And you can see, as we have kind of been visually seeing with other protests that we've been watching this week, folks there taking to the streets. In this case, we don't see folks completely blocking the road, but we have seen in some situations, for example, in LA, where folks took to the freeway, we see people mainly on the sidewalk here, but they've got signs and they've got flags, and they are out there speaking their mind about the situation. Don't forget, this is a situation where we now have multiple states that are talking about how they're going to handle these protests, and just today we learned that Texas Governor Greg Abbott was going to deploy the National Guard there in Texas across the state to respond to protests there. Once again, this live feed coming to us from San Diego, but this is some good news here for you folks. Looks like we've got both of our interview feeds back. Okay, so there's Downey, California. Are we able to listen in? Okay, let's do that, and thanks for bearing with us here on Live Impact News.
Yeah. My name is Carlos Montes, C-A-R-L-O-S-M-O-N-T-E-S. I'm a member of Centro CSO. I co-chair the Education Committee. I'm a longtime human rights activist here in East LA. I grew up in this neighborhood. I went to Garfield High School. I've been arrested many times for my activism. I've always had my day in court where the lawyers proved that all I was doing was marching and rallying and protesting against police abuse, against war, and against racism. And we always demand our day in court not to be arrested in the middle of East LA with our family. I've been arrested at 5 o'clock in the morning when the sheriff bust the door in, a SWAT team with FBI, due to my activism supporting the struggle of oppressed people like the Colombianos and the Palestinians. I had my day in court, and there was no proof that I was providing material support to terrorist organization. It's all a farce. It's all a farce. I denounce this arrest as a human rights violation, a violation of our right to protest. We are here to support the family. We're going to be protesting. We're going to be going to court. We're going to continue to fight. And the big problem here is Trump. Trump is the one that ordered the ICE raids, right? Trump is the one that ordered the National Guard. I remember the Marines on Winter Boulevard in East LA during the '92 rebellion. They had no business coming to East LA doing the Marines. So again, we're here to denounce Trump, the ICE raids, and demand get ICE out of our community. We don't need the National Guard. Even the governor and the city attorney has sued Trump to get his ass out. So estamos aquí para demandar no las deportaciones, no a la migra, no a la Guardia Nacional, no los queremos. Es una violación de los derechos humanos de la gente mexicana. We have a long history of discrimination, of police abuse, primarily among the Mexican-American Chicano community here. We are tired of years of suffering discrimination and police abuse and immigration abuse. Ya estamos hartos de los ataques de la mira de la policía, la discriminación contra la gente mexicana y latina. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Carlos Montes. Next, we're going to hear from Nadia Topete. She was one of the witnesses who was there when this happened. Thank you to Nadia, who's also a member of Centro CSO. Thank you, Nadia.
Spell your name.
Yes, my name is Nadia Topete, N-A-D-I-A-T-O-P-E-T-E. Hello, I'm Nadia Topete, a member of Central CSO. I'm here to talk about what I witnessed today. Today at 10:30 a.m., I witnessed firsthand a kidnapping of a member of my community here in East Los Angeles. Federal agents hit a man in his car multiple times with 2 of his babies in the back seat and his wife. The federal agents then tear gassed the area to kidnap him. They made his wife come out of the vehicle to put her hands up. She was in distress and frantic, holding a toddler in one hand and having to put the other up. She then ran to the other side of the car to check on her newborn baby, while HSI held guns up to her. My sister and I were there recording and letting the wife know that we were there and she wasn't alone. We were there supporting her, and that she had the right to ask for their last names and their badge numbers. The agents then smiled and laughed at her and thought that what they were doing was funny, as if they were proud of what they were doing. This is unacceptable. We must condemn these agents for their inhumane behaviors. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido.
Nadia Topete dijo de que la esposa estaba en el carro cuando sucedió y su recién nacido de 6 meses tuvo que sacarlo porque le habían baleado con gas pimienta, y así que estuvo muy temorosa la esposa y por eso no pudo venir hoy día, como dijo su abogado. Pero dijo Nadia de que de buenas que estuvimos ahí para poder ayudar y decirle a la comunidad que no están solos. Muchas gracias. Next up, we're going to hear from Brandon Bussey. Did I say it right? Bussey. Brandon Bussey. Bussey, he is the father at Dolores Mission in Boyle Heights. Also, Dolores Mission is part of our rapid response team, and he's awesome. He was there actually when it happened, so in some ways, also a witness. Let's give it up for Father Brandon.
My name is Father Brendan Bussey. That's Brendan, B-U-S-S-E. I'm the pastor of Dolores Mission Church, member of the Rapid Response Network, the Boyle Heights Rapid Response Network, organized by Proyecto Pastoral. And I'm here today primarily because I am a priest and pastor in this community, and that this is a sacred moment. I've heard that there's 2 ways to live our lives, as if everything is sacred or nothing is. And there are some people in this moment who are living as if nothing is sacred. They are acting as if nothing is sacred. Over in Downey, we know 2 different religious communities, their rights violated by ICE activity on their property. I heard one of the ICE agents said to the pastor who denied them entrance that all of this country is our property, which seems to me to be an insanity that we're living in right now. That this is a sacred moment. If nothing is sacred, then nothing is safe. And we are here because we defend this community, because we love this community, because we are this community. If you live as if everything is sacred, then it doesn't matter what somebody has done. They don't deserve to have their children terrorized as you arrest them. If you need to arrest them, you do so with a warrant. You do so calmly and safely, not to cause further harm. If this is a moment where we recognize that everything and everyone is sacred, then we need to do something differently. I have heard that President Trump sells Bibles, but he surely hasn't read them. Because if he did, he would know that our faith, the Christian faith, begins with the story of a holy family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, and a wicked king who felt threatened by their birth and ordered that all children be murdered because of his insecurity. If we are living that moment again today, we need to read that story and know what that story is actually about. It's about the sacredness of the human family. All families, no matter where they're from, no matter what they've done, they do not deserve to be terrorized as we saw them terrorized this morning here in Boyle Heights. That's right. We need to decide, each and every one of us, if everything is sacred or nothing is. And if everything is sacred, we should all be out here calling for the rights of all of our community to be respected. I call specifically, as a pastor in the Catholic Church, for all religious leaders now to stand with their people. That the bounds of our parish are not even at the walls of our church. Our parish communities, our congregation communities are the entire neighborhoods. You may have seen me out last night calling for nonviolent resistance in the face of this terror, with a community, an interfaith community that recognizes, no matter who we are, where we come from, that all is sacred. I call on all religious people of faith, people committed to this story of the Sacred Family, the Holy Family, to stand with all of these people today and always. Thank you very much. Si quieren una palabra en español, yo soy el párroco de la Misión Dolores, yo soy Padre Brendan y estoy aquí porque quiero ser un buen pastor. Y con este pueblo no cuesta ser buen pastor, porque estamos aquí reconociendo la dignidad de todos, 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 sin excepción. Y estamos aquí abogando por las familias que no merecen este tratamiento. No importa lo que han hecho en sus pasados, tienen derechos ahora, siempre. Y estamos aquí defendiéndonos en el nombre de nuestro Dios, en el nombre de nuestra fe, que dice en voz clara que toda la familia es sagrada y debemos defenderla. Muchas gracias y ánimo. Adelante.
Our next speaker is Enrique Velázquez. He's part of our rapid response team with Proyecto Pastoral.
Hi, I am Enrique Velázquez, and I am a member of the Boyle Heights Immigrant Rapid Response Network for the Boyle Heights. So I happened to be there this morning when the husband of this family was hijacked. What I have in my hand is what they used today against this family. But not only that, when they boxed the car, they pointed their guns to the family. A 6-month-old baby in the car, a 6-year-old baby in the car, and they didn't care. The woman, the mother, was so scared, not knowing what to do, and yet they were laughing at her face. I mean, what kind of people does this? We're doing this because we love our community, because of a sea of love, but also because of rage. We cannot stand still and not do anything because they have militarized the city of LA. We live in LA, we don't live in, I don't know, Ukraine, if you will. People in these streets have military training and they're using it against Latinos, no other race. They're stopping and arresting Latinos, people that look like me, because they don't look white. What are you doing? I mean, they are arresting people that is glass people that works in the garment industry. We saw it last Friday. They're not criminals. They were working in that factory for 15, 20 years. They were sewing garment. I mean, what kind of criminals is these people? Trump is lying. He just wants to get away with whatever he wants. I mean, it's not fair. Soy Enrique Velázquez. Soy miembro de la red de respuesta rápida de aquí de Boyle Heights. Llegué esta mañana al lugar donde secuestraron al padre de esta familia, después que lo encajonaron, y lo que tengo acá es el gas lacrimógeno que usaron en contra de esta familia. Pero no solo eso, sino que también usaron sus armas militares en contra de esta familia. Y se lo llevaron, lo secuestraron. La madre del niño de 6 meses que estaba en el carro y el niño de 6 años estaban en el carro, a ellos no les importó. ¿Qué tipo de gente hace esto? No vivimos en un país, en una ciudad en guerra, no vivimos en otro país más que en Los Ángeles. Y sin embargo, la gente con entrenamiento militar nos ha invadido. Y es la gente que está arrestando a la gente que se ve conmigo, la gente morena, simplemente porque no nos vemos blancos, porque no somos blancos. Y eso es la realidad. Todo está fundado por la agenda racista de Trump. Y lo siento, muchas gracias. Bueno, no lo siento, eso es la verdad.
Hello, hello. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. Se ve, se siente, el pueblo está presente. Se ve, se siente, el pueblo está presente. Para que sepan después de la conferencia de prensa. Please don't leave. We do want to have a rally here. Thank you for coming and showing La Migra who is united and not afraid to stand up and fight back for the people who are kidnapped on Whittier Boulevard. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Yeah, that's right. ¿Qué es lo que queremos? ¿Qué es lo que queremos? Justicia.
Okay, so we heard there that press conference just now wrapping up with various community members sharing their concerns with an immigration operation that went down at 2 Downey, California churches. What we know about the situation, according to various witness accounts, there was an elderly man who was dropping off his granddaughter at school, apparently one of several people who were detained in an immigration raid. There were immigration arrests that happened outside of Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church and at the Downey Memorial Christian Church, according to a council member in that area. And we heard some descriptions of how the situation allegedly went down, the fact that there were young children around, even, an infant in a car. We heard that scenario described by one gentleman, and just the terror that some of these family members now have after these raids. And this is a scene we've been seeing playing out across the country in the sense of people who are either taking to the streets to protest, as we see with some of our live feeds here, or physically taking to podiums to share what they say are their concerns with immigration operations in the U.S. Operations that we see the Trump administration defending today. We see response from other, state leaders. For example, we mentioned here as we now look live at this ICE protest in San Antonio, the fact that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has actually deployed the Texas National Guard himself to, in his words, ensure peace and order as some of these protests get underway. I believe they even closed down the Alamo area. Texas state troopers were out there clearing that area just in preparation of expected protests this evening. And a whole number, apparently, of state troopers were bussed in to Alamo Plaza today, and they were seen walking around. And people who were actually just there to see the Alamo, just tourists, were told to leave, as were pretty much everyone else who wanted to be in that area. There's a group that operates the Alamo. They told those folks who were trying to visit, saying that the closure was out of abundance of caution in an effort to preserve the historic site. But here we see this protest in San Antonio, largely taking up the street at this point. I don't know if this road was specifically closed for these protesters or if they were elsewhere and they ended up gathering here and have stopped traffic. I don't see any cars attempting to get through, so it is possible that this was a planned closure. And of course, as we get more information on the situation, we'll definitely bring that to you. But we've been seeing that, as we move to our 3 box, we've been seeing the ICE protest that continues to go on in Raleigh. Here in North Carolina, we talked about the fact that not only are there folks who are protesting the ICE operations that are going on nationwide, but our affiliate out there has talked about how people have been gathering over at the legislative building in protest of legislation that has actually made its way now to Governor Josh Stein's desk. This is immigration-related legislation, Senate Bill 153. And we talked about how there was prior legislation that had already passed that had required local, government agencies and local sheriffs to cooperate with ICE. This new legislation, which still remains a bill at this point, we don't know if the governor plans to sign Senate Bill 153, but this would actually heighten some of those requirements of cooperation between local law enforcement and immigration and customs enforcement. As far as the response we're seeing in Raleigh, the police response, the police chief there said that they, were prepared for folks who want to come and exercise their First Amendment rights. They expect, of course, folks to do it peacefully. And I will say, watching this feed, it appears to be pretty peaceful, if not almost kind of a joyful gathering, as we've seen throughout the evening at that Raleigh, site, people dancing. There was music, and we just kept seeing a lot of, I guess, joviality, if you will, considering the heavy topic at hand here. So we'll continue to keep an eye on things as we see this remain a big issue, of course, here in our backyard, across the country, and not only calling into, the dialogue here, immigration policies, how people feel about them. Do they agree with them? Do they disagree? But also some of the movements that we've seen from the Trump administration afterwards. There are people talking about that as well. There are people who agree with President Trump calling in the National Guard, calling in the Marines to respond. We've certainly heard people who also disagree, including some of the leadership there in LA. We've heard multiple days in a row now, LA Mayor Karen Bass talking, taking to the podium to say this is totally unnecessary. We have this under control. The president, however, we can see continue to defend the decision, saying that this was necessary for public safety. We know that more than 200 people have been arrested in the LA area over the recent days in these protests. There has been some violence. Earlier in the week, we did hear the police chief reference the fact that while there was violence, he had thought that the protests were largely peaceful, but not to discount the fact that there have been, we've seen in some situations, vehicles set on fire, people blocking roadways, encounters between the protesters and police officers on scene. And, that is also a big topic of conversation for folks who are watching this. We heard more recently the police chief addressing the I guess at this point, that viral video of that reporter getting shot with the rubber bullet, saying that that was certainly a regrettable situation and that police needed to be basically more attuned to what they were doing. That shouldn't have happened. And he said, just as people can have their protests derailed by violence among the crowd, police can have their, their goals and how the public sees them derailed by a situation like that. So he said that they needed to be more careful. Looks like we've got some of our feedback from LA. We haven't seen a whole lot throughout the day yet, and now we've got something popping up here on the Live Impact News studio. I don't know if there are interviews going on. I know, Jeb, you've got your headphones on.
I'm listening in right now. It appears one of NBC's reporters is getting ready for a live shot there. You can see some dancing, some celebrations, kind of like the ones we saw earlier in Raleigh. If I'm able to understand the chatter that I'm hearing, rapper Macklemore was just there.
Oh, wow.
I guess he made an appearance and was talking with people. So that's interesting. There was a little bit of buzz around that. But as you can see, it seems like this protest looks much different than the ones we've seen earlier in Los Angeles. I think it's worth noting the majority of the protests that we've seen here on Live Impact News have been peaceful, have been very much just good demonstrations. But this is different in that this seems to be a cultural celebration.
Yeah.
They're dancing, they're listening to music. And this reporter getting rid of his live shot, he was just asking some people, he's like, why are you standing here? Like, what are you guys out here to do? And the woman who you just saw on the right, she was telling him, we are here to share our culture. Like, this is what we want to be doing while we're out here. So a really, really, a really, really neat way to kind of be expressive and share their culture right now.
Yeah, you pointed out the fact that this was similar, to what we were seeing in Raleigh. I think it is a bit of a different, view to see after, a few days now that we've covered these protests, seeing the aerial shots from different cities, where we've got folks who are, marching in the streets or they're, waving signs. Some of them have saltier language, if you will. To seeing this, it is, kind of different vibe, an interesting vibe where you do have, I guess I use the word joviality, you know, there's dancing, there's music. We saw that in Raleigh too, just before we lost that feed. But I wonder if this this reporter's going to give us a report soon. I know we're.
Yeah, I'm listening in right now.
And so, yeah, with that being LA, I mean, it's 9 o'clock here on the East Coast. I feel like they are, well, it's almost 9 o'clock. They're probably getting into the heart of their news, their evening news there in LA. So I suspect he'll probably do a report soon, and we'll try to listen in if we can get that to you. I know the timing can sometimes not work out in that favor, but we'll watch it in the meantime.
Yeah, I'm looking to find out where this feed is. So to kind of bring you guys watching right now behind the curtain, what I'm working on right now is looking for feeds of different protests, trying to get a full 360-degree view of what's going on across the country. I've just found one. I believe it may be from Downey, but I'm looking. In the meantime, we'll continue to, we'll take you over to San Antonio, where you can see this massive protest right by the Alamo. This reporter looks like he's about to give a hit.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, too, you know, as we look at that San Antonio protest, there must be a speaker somewhere because everyone seems to be facing in the same direction, almost like they're looking at or listening to someone who's talking. Right. I'm sure we probably won't be able to hear it, you know, because they're pretty far away with this camera, but I am curious to see if there's any sort of audio coming from that feed at all.
And hearing a lot of honking.
Okay.
All right, back to that.
Well, folks, if you're just joining us here on Live Impact News, we've had a pretty busy evening. Some really interesting conversations that kind of run the gamut in topics. We'll remind you that a big one that we had was the chat with our Tradisha Woodard, who came here in the Live Impact News studio to update us on the Wadesboro police officer K9 Blitz killing. This was a situation from April where K9 Blitz was killed during a suspect apprehension. It did spark a lot of community concern, folks in the community asking for more transparency on how this all went down. There have been some lawsuits now filed. We knew about one of them already. There's a new one. So I just wanted to mention this for you as we get kind of down towards the top of the hour. And we might be transitioning now to our next hour of programming that we'd love for you to keep it here at 11 o'clock here on WCNC Plus. Tradisha is going to have the very latest on that brand new lawsuit. This was filed by the former handler, the former trainer of K9 Blitz. In his words, looking for more transparency and more accountability in the situation. She's kind of break down a lot of this saga since it has been several weeks in the making and has drawn a lot of community interest. So we just wanted to put that in front of you as well. Meantime, we do continue to watch these protests. We don't have any indication that things are going to slow down either. We've been covering these protests day by day for pretty much the whole week, and obviously with these sparking from over the weekend, there have been multiple days now of protests, and things just almost kind of seem to be escalating in the sense that every time we check our feeds here on Live Impact News every single day, whether it's the morning, afternoon, or evening, there are protests happening somewhere in the United States, even here in the Carolinas. It does look like we've got our 3-box back here. Updating now, a couple views from Los Angeles, San Antonio remaining in the top right of your screen, and potential for a report from the scene from this reporter, although once again, I'll remind you, this is kind of free-flowing, this is raw and unedited. We are kind of at the mercy of what this reporter and this crew has been tasked to do for their market, for their station, for their viewers, and we have the opportunity to kind of give you a look behind the curtain and see their feeds in the meantime. So if we're not able to bring that report to you, as it happens, as we are kind of coming down on time, just keep it here, WCNC Plus. At 11 o'clock, we're going to have the very latest for you on these protests and also the local impacts in the Carolinas. And stick with us every single day. Keep us on all day. You never know what will pop in with brand new information. Thanks for joining us here on Live Impact News. I'm Vanessa Rufus alongside producer Jeb Goldman. We'll see you next time.